when Arthur finally, when the sage was being threatened in that scene, when they were overrunning that training facility, and it's like a knife to her neck or something like that, and that allowed him to I want to save her more than I don't want to look at myself or look at the past. And he unlocked or was able to wield the full power of Excalibur, right? And that's kind of how I felt, was like I was not very biblically literate, or, I would even say 3 years ago. And I went on this journey. There's a whole story behind it too, but I went on this journey of just sitting down with my Bible and just every day, just massive study. And when you do that, which is, it's not sexy, and it's not, like the initial part of I don't just want to sit down and read my Bible. I don't want to sit down and read. I got things to do, kind of like what you mentioned before. But if you can get to the point to where nothing else matters and you want the power of the sword more than you want the other stuff, if you can get there, it is a superpower. All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the WatchWell Podcast, where we exist to be a resource for the Christian to combat the passive consumption of entertainment and pursue a more complete biblical worldview. I'm your host, Parker, and this is my co-host, Nick. We can get a drum roll here. Nick, how was your week, man?
It's actually been a pretty good week. Got a lot going on. I'm excited to do this episode reviewing the movie that I'll let our guest tell us what movie we're going to review, but I'm excited to do it, excited to talk about it. I've actually watched it twice in the past 3 weeks or so. So, yeah, I'm ready to go.
All right, man. Cool. Well, let's just jump into it because I think this is going to be a fun episode. Our guest today is Steve Cruz from the Regular Man Podcast. Steve, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell the listeners what your podcast, what value it aims to give, and then where they can find it.
Sure. Yeah, you can find me everywhere. But try not to go to YouTube. Those guys are a bunch of commies. So find me on Rumble and Twitter and X or whatever we call it, and everywhere you listen to it. I host the Regular Man Podcast, which is exactly what it says. It's just a podcast for the regular guy. I try to aim to be kind of like Joe Rogan without the shrooms and F-bombs.
Take a ride on that hitter. Boom!
I celebrate biblical masculinity. We have a lot of red pill movement, a lot of red pill guys who really, they have a little bit of truth that they understand, that the world has become extremely effeminate, and feminism has run rampant to the detriment of males. So they get that right, but then they turn themselves into predators pretty much, and just live like the devil. And that's not biblical masculinity. So rather than jumping on that bandwagon or the opposite of being ashamed of that and living an effeminate lifestyle, I try to tell men that it's okay to be men. It's good to be a man, like Michael Foster says. It's good to be a man, and there's virtue in. The problem is we haven't had very many good examples, right? We haven't had very many good examples of what a good Christian man is, at least in my generation. And so I'm not saying that I aim to be like. I try to point people to people who are good examples of that and what that might look like in Scripture. And we called, I think it was when I was interviewing you, we talked about garage theology.
Mm-hmm, loved it.
It really does sum it up very nicely, taking the ivory tower kind of, I would say pretentious kind of theologian, and bring it to a regular man's level and just talk about it. We don't have to hide behind denominations or we regular guys just don't have time, man. I don't have time. I don't have time to look up every single denomination and look up what words mean. The $5 words that you can use a 25-cent word for, like hypostatic union and transubstantiation and consubstantiation, and just meet somebody where they're at and tell them the truth. And that's what I aim to do. I just celebrate being a man, being a biblical man, and we talk straight about the Bible.
Yeah, that's super awesome. I think that that's definitely hitting a niche that's needed, where you have the theologians that they teach and there's a place for them too, but then there has to be a bridge, and I think that your podcast does a good job of that. And I wanted to mention the you put an emphasis on being practical, like practical takeaways, so I think that's good. Would you just talk a little bit about that, kind of how your episodes kind of flow, and then what someone could expect in terms of practical takeaways on how they could apply it?
Sure. Yeah. The most practical book of the Bible is Proverbs, right? There's 31 days in the month, and there's 31 chapters of Proverbs. And you don't have to be an scientist, brain wizard to understand that makes sense. God probably mapped it out that way. And I love Proverbs because it's plug and play. You can just take it for what it says and immediately apply it to your life. And I think that a lot of biblical teaching that you find today isn't like that. It just isn't. You can go to a sermon on Sunday and listen to several different kinds of pastors, and you'll get everything from the transubstantiation talk of the Greek word and what this means in Koinonia Greek and the cultural context, and they'll never talk about what that means to you. So what? What does that mean in my life? And then you have the opposite, where they don't even get into they'll have a topical sermon, and they'll have a big Eva kind of celebration, rock music with low lights and loud, glimmer air, and the skinny jean wearing pastors up there talking about his feelings, and really, really superficial. Now, I wouldn't even call it a message, jumping from one book to another. And the point is, you need the middle of that. You need someone to be able to take the deep, contextual, theological, hard truths and break it down so that you can understand it and apply it. Give it to your people so they can apply it to their life. What does that look like? So what does hypostatic union mean? Well, it means God took on flesh. It means that he feels everything that you feel. It means that he ate and he slept and he felt pain and joy and all the things that you feel. And so what? How does that mean? That means he can relate to you, man. That means that every single thing that you feel and you think and you say, he understands. That's what hypostatic union really means in a practical way. So getting to your point, when you can take the really, really important, really deep, really solid biblical teachings and you can break it apart and then you can give it to someone in a way that they can understand it. That's what the church needs. And that's really few and far between, I think.
Yeah, that's, I love the way you described that. I love the way that you talked about the middle, and you have, the over emotional and it's really, and that type of church is really just tailored towards women, isn't it? I mean, that's really kind of the, and then maybe the husband will come along on occasion and just sit in a chair, never sing a song, never really engage beyond that. But then, the other side is nothing but the intellectual, right? Like it's just the intellectual side. And I like that you're describing that middle where it actually impacts your everyday life. And we don't necessarily need all of the big words and, fancy definitions. And like, it's good to know those things. I'm not knocking knowing those things. I'm sure you're not either, but
not at all.
The average person doesn't necessarily need those. They need to know, what does this mean for my life and how do I live in light of it, right? So it's, I think the first time I heard anything from you, Steve, was Parker and I were doing a show with Greg Moore of the Dead Man Walking podcast.
Oh, yeah. Great
and
guy.
So I was on the road. I was driving up to Parker's house, and we were going to go together to that studio, to the Dead Man Walking Studios. And on my way there, I was listening to some of his show, and you were a guest on his show, and your episode was one of them that came up as I was, listening on my drive there, and I was really intrigued by it, really enjoyed it. So I've been looking forward. I wasn't able to be with Parker on your show, but regardless of that, I've been looking forward to talking with you and meeting you ever since that point. So, yeah.
That's awesome. Thanks, man. That makes me feel good.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. And don't feel bad, man. You had family stuff to deal with, and that always has to come first.
I will say encouragement in this game, this social media content creation game, is really helpful. It's really helpful.
It's true.
So cool. So let's jump into the movie. I'm pumped for the movie. I'm sure you guys are. What we usually do, Steve, is since you picked the movie, we usually have our guests kind of set the movie up, like a movie bio kind of thing, and then you could go right into why you picked the movie.
Sure. Yeah. The movie's King Arthur, right? It's the old
and you
school
came prepared.
DVDs.
This is the first time
used to use.
An actual DVD has been featured on the show. So you are an overachiever, good sir.
It's actually
and
there.
It's actually there.
It's actually in there.
It's not some other movie that you've watched at a different point and put in that case. Yeah.
Found the case.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, it's King Arthur. I really like. I think it's really close to the historical narrative that we have. I was really attracted to the movie because there's such a deep masculine feel to it, and it's not just Rambo, Terminator, Predator masculinity, which I love. We talked about that. I talked about that with Keith. I think the best leaders you'll ever find in your life, bar none, ever, are the reluctant leaders. The leaders who aren't looking for power, the ones who are natural born leaders who take on that mantle of leadership because they need to. There's a phrase in the military that we learned, and it's true everywhere you go. In the absence of a leader will emerge. That's why everybody gets trained one rank up and one rank down, because in the battlefield, somebody's going to die and you're going to have to take their place. Maybe you're going to die and somebody's going to have to take your place. Everybody has to understand their role and somebody else's role so they can pitch in. And the best ones are the ones who aren't looking for that role, who will take on that mantle of leadership because nobody else has, or because everybody else has failed. You have a child who is born into this conflict, and he's the rightful ruler. He's the rightful king, and they're trying to kill him. So many similarities with Christ, right? With Herod's trying to kill all the babies, and Moses trying to kill all the babies. Well, he's trying to kill this baby. He's trying to kill the rightful ruler. He's trying to gain the throne. And so he's sent off to live with the sinners. He's sent off to live with the whores in the dregs of society. And he's adapted to that society, being a leader. But you could see as the movie progresses, you could see he's not a bad dude. He has a sense of virtue. He has a sense of honor. He has a sense of right and wrong, and he stands up for the ladies who are being beaten, right, and who are being mistreated. He stands up for his friends. There are just so many good things. I could go on for days about the similarities between how a Christian ought to live and then the depiction of King Arthur in this movie. And when he finally does take ownership of the throne, he beats the bad guy, and dude's a really bad guy. Like, if you haven't seen the movie, like he literally kills his wife, he literally kills his daughter just for power. And he has this pact with this demon. The good guy beats the bad guy, and it's a pretty epic kind of a battle. He goes through the desert. He goes through the wilderness in order to finally gain that right, finally embrace that role. And then at the end of the movie, you see the Vikings, right, who have been the ones who've been buying slaves and really kind of just sucking the resources out of their land. He gets them. He nullifies the agreement that he had that the Vikings had with with his uncle. I think it was uncle. And he says, "No, you're not going to bow to a king. You're going to bow to the people, and you're going to bow to who we are." And then when they do, and then this symbol of submission, he says, "Now get up. Let's have some food, man. Who needs enemies when you can have friends?" And I was like, man, what a perfect way to end the movie, where you've embraced, you've overcome, you've gone through, and it really is a story that of sanctification through the whole time. Like he's just getting to be a better and better and better man.
And there's a couple movies that it kind of reminds me of narrative, like how the story plays out, and that's the first Superman from 1978. Even the way you described the movie, Steve, like you could say the same thing about that Superman movie, because it's a child born into this chaotic situation, right? It's like, and he's sent away. So there's parallels between King Arthur and Superman, I feel like. And then there's also, this one's maybe a little more humorous, but it's almost like Lion King. It's the evil uncle killing the rightful king father, and then Simba's sent off, and then eventually returns to take his throne, right? Like it's kind of the same story, and I'm sure there's countless others that kind of flow the same way, but that's just a couple things that came to mind when I was watching it. But yeah, I enjoyed it too.
Yeah, very good. I didn't put that together, but you're exactly right. The Lion King kind of story, it's very, very similar with that redemptive role where they are cast out, and very, very good. I didn't put that together.
Yeah, I guess as you were talking, Steve, and you were kind of lining everything, out chronologically through the film, it really does a good job contrasting leadership in a prideful manner, and then leadership from a place of humility. And if you look at why the bad guy, and I forget his name, I don't even know if I could say it. What's his name?
I don't know. It's
the actor?
No. Here, I'm gonna pull it up real quick.
The characters' names are really I don't know. His name's really hard to say.
Vesuvius.
Yeah. It's Vortigern.
Yeah.
Vortigern.
Yeah, I don't. It's not natural to say at all. I don't know.
No, it's not at all. He is, to the exactly what you said earlier in your synopsis was he's literally sacrificing his family members so that he could be lifted up with more power. And I just think the movie did a really good job contrasting those two things. You've got the bad guy who's just super evil, and then you've got Arthur, who is standing up for the least of these, more emulating, kind of like you said in your opening comments about the movie, more of a Christ-like, depiction. What we ought to live like as Christian men, where we don't necessarily back down. We fight for the correct reasons, but it is from a place of humility and love for other people.
Yeah, totally. I think the example in, it's not necessarily a Christian movie, quote unquote. I'm not sure if I'm not sure if there are many things that are quote unquote Christian, right. Without throwing a bunch of those anti-Christian nationalists under the bus. You can have a Christian country because you have a Christian rock. You have a Christian house. You have a Christian car.
I just usually associate bad movies with the jargon Christian movie.
Yeah.
It's like
right.
It's like Hallmark. It's just bad.
Yeah, B-grade movies.
Christian. Yeah.
Even, are you guys old enough to remember the is it USA Up All Night?
I'm not.
No.
Night. It doesn't sound.
So when
familiar.
I was a teenager, there was, so maybe some of your audience will remember. Maybe you got the old fogies like me who were growing up in the 90s, and as a teenager, and there was the USA Up All Night, and it was some airhead bimbo who was like hosting the thing. And it was always some crappy B-grade movie. And it was always some stupid, like, no-name actors, terrible camera angles. Like, you could see shadows. And, it was just awful, awful movies. And every time I see, like a Christian, quote-unquote, movie, or like a Hallmark movie, or one of those, it's just... I remind myself of the Up All Night kind of terrible movies, like the Mystery Science Theater 3000 ones.
Yeah, I do remember that.
You have Okay. So the crazy Canadian dude with the little puppets in a movie theater that are making fun of the movies. They're always like not even B grade, like C grade. There, you're like they're dubbing their sounds and making them say stupid stuff. It makes everybody laugh. And I look at like the Left Behind series, and I look at the Pure Flicks, and I'm gonna get a bunch of hate. You're gonna get a bunch of hate mail because of me for saying this, but it's all crappy movies.
They can direct it. They can send it directly to us because we agree.
Yeah.
It's just terrible. It's awful.
The Regular Man Podcast at gmail.com.
Yeah, that's right.
Just send it right there every time.
That's awesome.
But that's the antithesis of what we're supposed to do, right? We're supposed to work for the Lord in everything that we do. And we're supposed to bring quality and relevancy to everything that we do. And if you're going to make a movie, if you're going to make a song, if you're going to make a podcast episode, whatever you're going to do, you should do it with the best quality that you can possibly imagine given your situation. So throwing a bunch of crap together and putting a Christian label on it and trying to sell it to the Christian bookstore, it's just garbage, nonsense. And I don't blame people for not wanting to buy it. I don't want to buy crap either. I want to buy good tools. I want to buy a good car. I want to buy a Toyota because the Toyota doesn't break down. It's a quality car. I'm not going to buy we used to make fun of Ford Pintos back in the day. But whatever the equivalency would be, a Hyundai or
a Honda Ridgeline. I hate that. It's not even a truck.
Let's go with a Ridgeline.
The Honda Ridgeline.
People will pay for quality, okay, regardless of what it is. There's ketchup. People pay for Heinz 57, even though it's more expensive than anything else,
right?
Because they've been known for their quality of their product. Doesn't mean it tastes any better. It doesn't mean it's any different than Walmart brand or Safeway brand, but they associate that quality with that name brand. Warren Buffett would call that, what's he call that? Like brand value. Like just the value, just the name Coca-Cola is what sells Coke.
Right.
People will buy Coca-Cola because they appreciate the name. There's quality in that name. The name has value. And Christian used to have that value. It used to have that name. It used to have that quality in everything that we did. I mean, it took 500 years to build a church with stained glass windows and what perfect brick laid on a perfect brick from 5 generations of bricklayers. And now we have a freaking strip mall with skinny jean wearing man bun Subaru driving pastors who were 500 pounds, who suck down liquid diabetes, and talk about their feelings. And nowhere in there is quality.
It's one of the mysteries of God on how the 500-pound pastor can fit into the skinny jeans that you just mentioned.
Exactly right. Because everything on a 500-pound pastor is a skinny jean.
That's true. Nick, did you have anything to say about the dichotomy between the humility and I guess it would be self-worship is what it would be. We've all been there. You've been inspired by a new creative idea, but you've got 3 videos in the queue that need to be edited by the deadline. Or deciding to hire a full-time editor can feel like throwing money at the wall after salaries, benefits, and equipment. It could leave you frustrated and be a burden on your content schedule when editing stacks up. We want to help you bridge the gap. It's really simple. Log into your dashboard, sync cloud drives, and send us your raw files. And we'll do the rest. Worried about the final cut? With our 2 unlimited plans, you don't have to worry about revisions. We'll do it until it's right. We keep you in the driver's seat as content creation depicts the creator. Log into your project management dashboard via Notion for direct, instant communication and watch your project reach each phase of editing until completion. You create, and we just do the work. Vindicated Productions, removing the burden from content creation.
On that particular point, I mean, I think the movie made it very clear that that's the contrast. And it's humility in like a way that I don't know if you can call Arthur like truly humble. He comes from a humble place, but he's got a bit of confidence and arrogance to him, and you can see that in the kind of in the early stages when he's growing. It shows him like growing older, and he kind of taps the guy on the bottom during their sword fight. He's like, "Yeah, I'm better than you." Right? There's this humorous type of arrogance that he has.
Dig that though, man. That is that's such a dude thing to do. Be like, I got you. Yeah, come at me again. Mm-hmm. It's so like I found that so endearing. Like to remind a lot of this. Honestly, a lot of this movie reminds me of me, and maybe that's why it's one of my favorites. Is because everything is stacked against this dude, right? And he's just not quitting. He doesn't care. He'll beat somebody up. He'll get his butt kicked. It doesn't matter. He's just gonna do what he's gonna do, and until he stops breathing, he's gonna do what he's gonna do. And it's the same thing for me, man. I grew up in a pretty rough childhood. I went in the military. I'm in law enforcement, and everything about kind of what I do is rough, I guess. It's just I don't have a MyPillow, I don't have silk pajamas or whatever else. I don't like, aside from my wife, I don't like soft things. I just don't. I like leather, I like something. And so I like that hard circumstances make people tough. Our mutual friend Matt Reynolds says things all the time about embracing. You should have a voluntary hardship. You should embrace being uncomfortable. You should embrace lifting uncomfortable weight and to be stronger, right? Because that's your job as a man. You should be bigger, stronger, meaner, faster. That's part of your job. And I think upbringings in life that are difficult, that put you through the ringer, that are hard, that are trials, they make better, stronger men. But if you've got everything handed to you on a silver platter, if you don't have to work for what you have, you don't have to take care of it. If you don't have to lift heavy things then you won't have stronger muscles. You just won't. If you have lived a lifestyle that has put you under so much pressure and under so many hardships, you will be stronger because your body, your soul, your emotions, your mind, your intellect, everything will have to adapt in order to get you through it. And living that hard lifestyle, you just wear it. People just inherently know that about you. And we're talking about sanctification. When you live that, when it knocks off those hard edges and then you get stronger and it knocks off the hard edges, your end product is going to be not just stronger, but a finer product, a more polished product. And in the movie, you find that at the end, like I've already said before, when he's not looking for a conflict, he's looking for a team. He brought those guys together in a round table. We're all part of the team. He submitted to his man and let his man, forget his name, the Goose.
Yep, something.
Whatever it was.
Yeah.
Goosey. He let him
Goose something.
Yeah,
he let
the names are not
him.
going to work on this episode. The names we're just not going to
like
have
Maverick, Goose.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
He let him knight him, right? As showing them that they're not just their peers. It's not just I'm in control and everything, but as a man, I'm no better than you. You've endured just the same hardships that I have. You've come up in the muds and the struggles and everything that I have too. And true leaders do that. And then he brings even the enemies, he brings as friends. And the men who've grown up in the squalor and in the hard situations in life have that ability. They have that ability to kind of identify with people, that the cast-offs from church and the cast-offs from, Safeway. You can see the men who are natural born leaders when you go into even Walmart, and the Walmart people like them because they just have that attraction. Most people can go through Safeway and give a head nod, right? But if you can go through Walmart in Compton or in Portland, Oregon, or in Chicago and give a head nod and get people to nod back, like, there's something to that guy. And I think that essence of that, embracing that hard embracing the hard things and doing the hard things and being stronger. I think the movie really captured that in his personality.
There's I think part of what we see playing out in the movie is, so like when we meet him as an adult, right? He's already skilled. He's already got he's already better than the people he's sparring with, in sword fighting and all of that stuff. He's already skilled. There's hints of virtue and there's hints of being willing to protect other people. But at that point, it seems like he probably has no desire whatsoever to take on any responsibility, right? He doesn't have any, he doesn't want to be in charge. He doesn't want to be in control. And I think you talked about it kind of when you introduced the movie. He's reluctant. Those reluctant leaders are kind of often end up being the best leaders. And he has to be convinced through the course of the movie to take responsibility, right? He has to be convinced and it's not until you can add that responsibility and that weight of responsibility to his skill and his virtue that he truly becomes a leader, right? He has to have, you have to be skilled, you have to be competent in what you're doing, and you have to have a desire to help, but then you also have to be willing to take on responsibility. And I think that's kind of the transformation that we see in Arthur as the movie goes, where it comes to that point where he finally, I'm taking this on, this is where I belong, and I'm rightfully, the one to lead this charge, and he takes that role on. And that's where we see him transform into the leader that he becomes.
Yeah, and I think part of that, too, is him coming to grips with his past, right? So a lot of the reason why he was reluctant was because he didn't want to, and this is kind of where I went with it. The quote from the mage was, "Don't get me wrong," or it's when he's trying to use the sword, and the sword, she says something to the effect of like, "Oh, the sword's not rejecting you, you're not, like, you're rejecting the sword," or she said something like that.
Yeah.
And then the main quote was, "Don't get me wrong, I look away. We all look away. But that's the difference between a man and a king." Yeah. And I'm stealing something out of your book here, Steve. I actually have 4 practical steps that I kind of thought of when it comes to that, because really what that kind of made me think of was looking in the mirror at our own sin. And I know that this is a jump a little bit because he was innocent in that whole thing where they killed his dad, but trauma and just the evil surrounding that, even though I wouldn't say that it was a good depiction of his sin or something like that. It just kind of made me think of how often do we not want to look at our own sin, look in the mirror and develop. Right. And, as Christians, confronting our sin is about humility and growth, and like growth, specifically growth in Christ and the Bible. Scripture calls us to face the reality of that and submit to God's word. So the 4 steps that I came up with, I wanted your guys' opinion on these. But step 1 is you just have to acknowledge it. Like, that's the first thing. It's a place of humility, and you have to acknowledge. Well, I guess I just thought of this. You have to know that it's sin by reading the Bible first in order to know what that is. So you have to know the Bible and then understand what is sin, and then you have to acknowledge it is step 1. Step 2 is examine yourself with the Scripture. Step 3, repent and seek forgiveness. Number 4 is submit to God's will and walk in obedience. Would be the 4 steps to make it super practical. And I've got verses here if we want to jump into that too. But that whole depiction of men look away, but kings can't afford to look away. They have to look at themselves. They have to look at the problem, and they have to face it. And ultimately, that's what that rejection of cowardice is, why they are able to lead and be successful in influencing others.
That really is the kind of the separation between boys and men, right?
Right.
You have boys who they want the privileges of men with the responsibilities of boys, and you have a man who will embrace those responsibilities. And they don't even want the privilege because they know with more privilege are more responsibilities, right? So
Right.
The virtuous man sees those two. He sees the benefit and the responsibility, the cost, right? Being a man, we talk about people in our circles, at least, like the more conservative, reformed-ish kind of Christian circles. We talk about patriarchy, and we talk about a lot of things that really peeve off some of the effeminate men, white knights, and even the red pill guys. They don't like us because they call us what do they call us? What's the not alpha but beta males, or sigma males?
Yeah, something like that.
Whatever.
It doesn't make any sense.
Loser.
Yeah.
Loser. But a man will take responsibility, not just because it's his household, right? Not just because it's his wife, not just because it's his family, not just because it's his community, not just because he's a man, but also because it's the right thing to do. Also because someone has to. Someone has to take responsibility. Someone has to lead. Someone has to protect those people who can't protect themselves. Even if I don't have any skin in the game, even if they're not my people, even if they're not my family, even if they're not whatever. But that's why men inherently hate bullies. I hate bullies so much. I actually became a bully to the bullies in high school. I really did. I would go find the guys who would stuff people in the lockers, and I would just crack them in the face because I couldn't stand. And I had a temper problem. I'll admit that. I wasn't exactly the best example of somebody, but I didn't have my power under control. But I knew the difference between right and wrong, and I knew what those guys were doing was wrong, right? And as I got older, I kind of felt bad because a lot of them came from broken homes, and that's how they were acting out. That's how bullies become bullies. It's because they were bullied because, dad beat them or something. But I couldn't stand that. Somebody had to check them, right? And I think that just being, I don't even know why I got on this rabbit trail. Sorry, squirrel.
Yeah, no, you're good.
But I just think that goes to the fundamental basis of being a man is to not just to understand, the difference between right and wrong or sin, right? And that you need to embrace you have to accept your own faults, your own sin, acknowledge that before God and before men. And you have to acknowledge that you don't deserve the grace that God gives us, right? You don't deserve the power or the prestige or whatever you want to call it. You don't deserve the air in your lungs. You don't deserve the sight in your eyes. You don't deserve, the voice in your mouth.
Life.
You don't deserve the things that you have, the life that you have. And until you come to grips with that reality, then you're going to be lost. But once you understand all of those things and you understand the burden of a man, like, women are called to submit to man. Yeah, they are. You just are. If you're a wife, you are called to submit to your husband, and you better. If you don't, you're disobeying God. God says you will submit. It is not. He does not have to deserve it to you. He deserves it because God says to do it. He has to not only submit to God, but he has to up till die for you. He has to live a life that requires putting your sanctification, women, your sanctification first. It's not to live a happy life, it's to live a holy life. The purpose of a marriage is to live a holy life. The reason that men and women are married isn't for happiness. It's to have babies, take dominion, and be sanctified. That's why we have marriage, is to become more like God. And your husband, to any women who do watch this, I have kind of a feeling that your audience is similar to mine, which is mostly men. It's mostly garage theology men. But the call of a man is to sacrifice up to his life in order to make you holy, not happy. So the call of a man, the duty, responsibility, once a man actually understands that and they start implementing things in their life that kind of reflect that, that's a heavy, heavy burden. And that's where you see the reluctant leader. That's where you see people who they understand that and they see the gravity of what that means, right? You've crossed now from boy understanding to now man understanding, and from man understanding to leader, right? And then you understand what that actually means, the cost that it's going to, for every husband, it costs a lot. It really does. For every father, it costs a lot. It really does. And the least that you can do is submit to your husband and submit to your father and show them the respect that God tells you that you need to show them. The most cost is of the husband father. It really is, because he's supposed to die to himself every day for your gain, for your sanctification, for your good, just like Jesus did for us.
Yeah, and tugging on that a little bit further, I do think that, so like since the garden, we've had a pride issue, right? Because when we ate the fruit, we said, not God, but me, right? And I think that, you know, to kind of touch back and on all the different kind of things that we've talked about, the red pillars, you know, pride and humility, you know, husband leading up till death, and having the self-awareness, boys becoming men, all of those things are encapsulated by the ability of a boy to establish or achieve the level of maturity required to have that self-awareness, to be able to look at himself in the mirror and say, yeah, I'm not perfect. It isn't me, but God. It's God, not me. You know what I mean? It's I do have to submit to something, because there's something greater outside of me, and that's the pathway. Like that's the doorway to that growth, in order to be successful in all of the other responsibilities that you just mentioned, Steve. Yeah. And I think that those 4 practical steps, that the takeaways are the way to do that, you know?
A couple of years ago, I read a book called Death by Living. Have you ever heard of this book? It's by
I haven't.
It's by N.D. Wilson. So it's Doug Wilson's son. He's the author that wrote the book. And the tagline of the book is "Life is meant to be spent." And so one of the things that reading that book did for me was, well, there's a couple things that it did, is it put into perspective all of the mundane things that I think in my everyday life as a man, you know, work and various things that, you know, you do on a regular basis, all the mundane things. It put those into perspective as actually God-honoring, glorious things that I'm doing for God's glory and for my family, and, you know, all of those things. So it eliminated the mundane. Nothing is mundane anymore, because it's all God glorifying. But then it also makes you want to run through a brick wall when you're faced with something hard. Like you want it, like it put into perspective these, because for me, if I'm being really honest with myself, if I look back at growing up and my life in general, my life has been pretty easy. Like there's not been a lot of, you know, really real hardship that I've had to really like grit my teeth and get through. And so what that does a little bit is predispose me. So one of my flaws is kind of predisposed to lean into the easy a little bit too much when I'm faced with something. But what reading that book kind of helped me through and helped me see is like these things that are hard are the very things that we were created for, even if they're the things that end up killing us in this life, right? And when something is hard, when something is difficult, especially as men, and the book isn't really, I don't think, is really targeted towards specifically men, but especially as men, leaning into those hard things, just like you said earlier with weightlifting, it makes you stronger. It makes you more able to get through it. It makes you calmer when you face the next hard thing, right? You build up this endurance and you build up this perseverance. And so that book really helped me. So I'd recommend anybody listening to this read that book. I think it's really fantastic, and there's all kinds of good nuggets in there. So it's Death by Living by Indy Wilson. One of the things that I noticed, and this kind of goes along with what you were saying, Parker, and in a sense can be connected to the 4 practical takeaways that you mentioned before. But there's a quote right before King Arthur finally, conquers and succeeds, and it's where he has, and I assume it's a vision. I guess with the magical things in the film, maybe it is actually taking place, but it's where he grabs the sword, he has a vision of his father and what's going on there, and his father looks at him and says, the sword is yours, son.
Yeah.
Take it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so that immediately brought me to, okay, if I'm a Christian man, that's something that God could literally and has in his word said to me, right? Because the word says that the Bible, the word of God, is the sword of the Spirit. And it's what we use to wage war against every vain philosophy and arguments of man. And those things start in our own minds. We've got to wage war using the word of God against our own vain philosophies and things. And we have to kill those thoughts that are ungodly and not honoring to God, using the word of God, the sword of the Spirit, the sword that he's given us. So to every man, I've got my Bible here. It's tattered and it's kind of old. And, this is a big study Bible. It's falling apart. But like the sword is yours and God calls you son. Take it, right? Like that's so we have this unbelievable weapon at our disposal, but that so many men, maybe it's because of the sad state of a lot of churches and their inability to target men. Maybe it's the, men being lazy, and maybe it's a combination of both, but we have this sword and it's ours. We need to take it up and wield it the same way that King Arthur finally chooses to take hold of the sword that belongs to him and wield it to conquer the evil that's confronting him.
Yeah, Nick, you were talking about that book. It reminded me of one of my favorite authors is A.W. Tozer, and he's a contemporary of C.S. Lewis, a little bit earlier. But the book Practicing His Presence was probably one of the most instrumental books in my conversion. You say maybe following my conversion, or I don't know, whatever you want to call it, I still don't even have the theological, chops. I have whether somebody was saved, lost their salvation, gained it again, or they were never saved, and I don't even know. But even growing up in a Christian house and a poor Christian house, poor examples, I should say, and finally coming back to the faith in much later, I would say in my late 20s or early 30s. I don't even remember. One of the first things that I read, I was just so hungry for authenticity, for truth, right? For not just for practicality, right? Like you were saying, Parker, practical application. That's one of the things. That's one of the reasons I love just give me a Haynes manual. Just give me the user guide. I need that. I want step 1, step 2, step 3. That's why I just embraced those things so much, because that's what I craved. That's what I needed. It's what I believe most men need. And a give me a blueprint, man. Just tell me what I need to do, and I can figure out the details later. Right? Give me a blueprint. And I think the book A.W. Tozer wrote of Practicing His Presence is exactly what you're talking about, Nick. Is everything that you do is for the Lord. And this is what it means. Like even brushing your damn teeth, man. Even taking out the trash. Even waking up on time, going to bed early. Whatever you're doing, picking up the dog poop in the backyard. Like if you're doing it for the Lord, there's a practical element to it, and there's a spiritual element to it at the same time.
That's a good takeaway. the 4 steps that I mentioned, but then also just the encouragement that, because guys, like, we all know this, that we get trapped in our routine, and then we tend to retreat, and we just kind of shut off, and the monotony, kind of like Nick was talking about, just takes over, and it's like, man, what am I worth anymore? What am I? There's no purpose to what I'm doing anymore, and just that reminder that, more important than a reminder, the biblical reminder that even those minute things or whatever are bricks. You mentioned bricks earlier, where that, you just layering those bricks, and we're making sure that they're just perfect and they're lining up, and eventually it builds something beautiful. And even those little things, taking, brushing your teeth and taking care of your health, the mile that you walked because you can't run yet because you're out of shape, like even if you can't run a mile,
hey, I'm trying, bro. I'm trying, man.
You walk to the stop sign, or maybe you need to do something hard and you sign up for mixed martial arts or jiu-jitsu, or, you need to, because you need to, I don't know, maybe whatever. You need to do something hard that is not, or maybe like out of your comfort zone is what I'm trying to say. Maybe you need to lift weights, or maybe you need to go like apologize to the person and listen to the conviction on your heart. Maybe you need to do that. Maybe it's something as simple as like, hey, maybe I need to read a proverb every day, or a psalm every day, or just don't let the withdrawal due to the monotony own you. You need to own your own life, kind of like back to what Nick was saying about, this is the sword I've given you, take it, and let that dictate, or not dictate, but let that grow in your own life so that it reaches other people. And that's kind of everything that we're talking about is it gets back to the Bible and how it starts in your own life. If you can take that place of humility, humble submission to God, and let it work in you so that it can work, you can use it as a weapon to work in other people and share the truth and encourage and disciple and mentor and lead.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. This essentially does come down to leadership. Every man has some sphere of leadership that they're responsible for, right? Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter if you're even a 12-year-old. You have a sphere of leadership that you're responsible for. If you're a boy, you just are. You're born into that. And if you're not there yet, then you're learning to be that. I mentioned Joe Rogan without the F-bombs and stuff like that, right? One of the podcasts that I absolutely love, that it's not a Christian podcast. There are consistent Christian principles in just about everything that you can listen to, right? Country songs, even rap. I hate rap. Okay. I hate it. But there are some rap songs that, what's that? Jelly Roll. All right. He's a rapper. Mm-hmm. Rapper. There are some biblical truths, even with some rap crap, right?
That's kind of why we do what we do, is because you can't make sense of the world without Christian principles.
You wouldn't probably consider Sean Ryan's show or Jocko Willink Christian podcast, but there are so many phenomenal things for men to understand and to glean from those podcasts. I love the guys in Ogden. I love the guys in Moscow. I love Cross Politic and Haunted Cosmos and Eric Kahn. I love those guys. But I don't sit in a silo and only listen to Christian or Reformed things. I don't think that people should. I really don't. We're called to eat the meat and spit out the bones. What we're called to do is live in this world and be the light and the salt. And we're supposed to infect people. We're supposed to be the yeast that leavens the bread, right? We're supposed to spread everywhere. Well, how are you going to do that if you're sitting in your own silo only listen to Christian podcasts, only watching Christian TV, you're not going to be able to do that, man. If you're living in this world, you're supposed to affect this world for Christ. Period. Full stop. And if you're not affecting this world for Christ, if you're sitting on your hands, then you're failing. You're a failure. It doesn't mean you got to be a missionary, but it means you can't be a coward. It means you have to be able to speak your mind. It means you have to stand for your convictions. It means you have to be able to say, this is right and this is wrong. No, I won't call that. That's not a man. That's a woman. No, I won't call that a woman. That's a man.
Right.
XX and XY. That matters. Right? No, I won't say that woman is perfectly innocent. She just murdered her baby. No, she deserves accountability for what she just did. She committed a crime. And what the accountability looks like, at least biblically, is capital punishment. Mm-hmm. I got in a lot of trouble on my podcast at my work when I talked about this with Ben Zeisloft. And I said, that's murder. Dig a hole, put him down. Done. We're over. That's what God says. God says you take a life, your life is forfeit. And I got in a lot of trouble because people don't want to hear that. People don't want to.
Right.
And the reason that that's so hard to embrace is because there aren't too many people who have the stones to say that. One of the things that I've noticed that in the Christian Twitter sphere, at least, that the abolitionists, have a tendency to do sometimes, is they'll sit in their own silo, in their own echo chamber, and shut people off who don't agree with them for everything. And their people group gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And now that you have more and more enemies because they don't agree with everything that you say. And I think that,
right.
And the people who do have the stones to say that, if you don't say every single thing, you run the risk of backing yourself into a corner and sitting in your own silo when you disagree with everybody and you say, well, no, I'm not going to listen to you now. And you shut that door. And then, they don't agree with everything that I say. And you shut that door. And you keep shutting doors until it's just you. It's just you in a closet somewhere.
I've been kind of thinking about this a lot too, is at least I can talk about my own experience where, I wouldn't say that I wasn't saved. I would say that I had my salvation, but I definitely wasn't as biblically literate as I am now in my life. And it really does feel like, when Arthur finally, when the sage was being threatened in that scene, when they were overrunning that training facility, and it's like a knife to her neck or something like that, and that allowed him to I want to save her more than I don't want to look at myself or look at the past. And he unlocked or was able to wield the full power of Excalibur, right? And that's kind of how I felt, was like I was not very biblically literate, or, I would even say 3 years ago. And, and I went on this journey. There's a whole story behind it too, but I went on this journey of just sitting down with my Bible and just every day, just massive study, and I was able to do that with my schedule, and I was just in it, and I sank in it. And then I would go and cross-reference with different pastors, and I was listening to 2 and 3, 4 sermons a day, and I was inhaling it, and I couldn't stop. And when you do that, which is, it's not sexy, and it's not, it can grip you, and it's awesome when you're in it. But the initial part of I don't just want to sit down and read my Bible. I don't want to sit down and read. I got things to do, kind of like what you mentioned before. But if you can get to the point to where nothing else matters and you want the power of the sword more than you want the other stuff, if you can get there and you can memorize scripture and understand scripture within the context of the chapters, within the books, within the, greater overarching context of the Bible itself, inter-book related, it is a superpower. It absolutely is a superpower when you're talking to someone. And then what's cool is you can watch a movie, or you can hear a conversation at a coffee shop, or you can overhear a conversation at work, or you can hear a situation at work, or even if you're talking about something with your wife, you start to see things differently, and you start to remember what you've studied, and it's much easier to apply it then than or even have supporting evidence for why you're making a decision, which gives you a justified foundation for that. It's way easier to do that when you've been prepared and you've studied it. And that goes back to leadership as well. So if men aren't preparing, then how are they, you're a military guy. It's like gearing up to go to Afghanistan, but you're not allowed to take them. You're M16, right? You're M4. You're not allowed to do that. You have to leave that at home because you didn't train with it. You don't know how to break it down and clean it. You don't know how to, reload. You don't know how to whatever, fill in the blank, right? You're not allowed to take your weapon with you. The only offensive weapon in the armor of God is the sword of the Spirit. If you can't take your offensive weapon with you, it leaves the Christian only on defense. And we all know what that feels like when we're dealing with experts, right? And we're being told this stuff about whatever, pandemic or whatever,
get me started on that, man.
Whatever evolutionary
I'm going to get banned from YouTube again for the third time.
Whatever evolutionary theory and whatever scientist or expert puts out this next week, you're able to actually engage it with something that you can stand on. And you start to deconstruct those other worldviews and see presuppositions as they are. If I can use, a $5 word or whatever he said earlier, and it becomes a game almost. It's actually quite fun to be able to tune in and tap into that and be like, oh, I see where that's coming from. And I also remember what I read in Ephesians or Romans or Galatians or whatever. And I know how to biblically combat that argument and honor God and give a defense for the faith in life. And that's the most empowering feeling as a Christian.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. There's also, you were referencing Ephesians 6, right? There's zero armor behind you.
Right.
Everything's, the helmet, the belt, the breastplate, the feet, everything is defense in front of you. There's nothing behind you. So your job not only is the only attack weapon you have is the sword of the word, right? So your job obviously is to attack, but it's also don't be a coward and turn around and run away because you're going to get shot up, man. There's nothing protecting you when you run away. And I remember what I was going to say about the podcast that I listened to, the non-Christian podcast that I listened to, the Jocko Willink. One of the things that I absolutely love about Jocko Willink was his book, Extreme Ownership. Everything about that is biblical principle. Even if something's not your fault, if you're in charge of it, it's your fault. You're liable for it. You're responsible for it. If your wife who has a red credit card in her name and she runs up $50,000 of nice. Yes.
You brought the movie. I'll bring the book.
Yes. Yeah, my guy. My dude, I should show you my book. It's over there. I should show you. There's so many highlighters and underlined and circled and note things all over the whole book.
Yeah, I do have to make a confession. I haven't read it yet because we bought it and then my wife got to it before I did. Because I was, like I said, I was going through all those I was reading like the Reformed doctrines on predestination, and that took me like 2 years to get through, and it's like that big.
Okay. So let me pause right here. Everybody pause. If you're going to read a bunch of books, it's cool, right? Like I still have like 15, 20 books that I haven't read that I've already bought. But if you are going to do that, always go practical first and then theory or theology or whatever construct you want to put, but always application first. So extreme ownership means that you own something first and foremost, right? So if you're what I was saying earlier, if your wife charges $50,000 in stretchy pants and candles, right, or whatever, oils and stuff, even if it's not in your name, even if you didn't do it, none of it is something that you charged, you're still liable for it. You're still responsible for it. All of it. Your kid takes your car and crashes into the neighbor's house. You didn't do it. You didn't even tell him he can do it. But you're still liable for it. You're still responsible for it. And that is what it means to be a man. That's one of the things, that's one of the critical components of being a man, is you take ownership of things that are under your control. You take ownership of those things that are under your protection. You take ownership of those things, extreme ownership of everything within the sphere of your control. As Christian husbands, as Christian fathers, we should understand that and embrace that and love that and live our life understanding and make choices, make decisions in our life and in our family with that in mind, that what they choose to do is ultimately going to be my responsibility. When I read that, bro, that was so convicting of me. That was so convicting of me, not just at home, but at work too. Like, it made me a better dude at work. It made me a better husband. It made me a better father. It made me a better, and it's not a Christian thing. It's not a theological thing. It's not, I didn't have to understand the 5 points of Calvin to understand my responsibility is real. And it has a real practical application in my every single day life. So if anything anybody can take from this whole interview, this whole conversation about practical application and about this King Arthur movie, and what he ultimately did was he took ownership and he took accountability for everyone in England. Your responsibility as a husband is to take every responsibility of your wife. And your responsibility as a father is to take every responsibility of your entire family. And the more men that understand that, the more men that take on that ownership, will probably start making better decisions. We'll probably start holding our own selves to a tighter standard. And when we do that for ourselves, everybody else does too. It's just going to happen. Like a tugboat, when a tugboat starts tugging, right? You attach that cable to all the other boats that are stranded or broken or whatever. You don't have to be the biggest, strongest, baddest, whatever. You just have to keep going. And eventually you keep tugging in the same, you keep going in the same direction. Everybody's going to fall in line. Everybody within your sphere of control, everybody under your headship will fall into line. You don't have to be a jerk about it. You just have to tug in the right direction. You have to just start marching towards Christ. Everybody's going to fall in line.
Yeah, that's perfect, because if you're tugging, you say you don't have to be a jerk about it. If you're tugging, what you're really doing is coaching and teaching, mentoring and discipling your own family.
Exactly right.
And that's what we're called to do. That's how as men, we're supposed to be obedient to that. Yeah. I don't have really anything else to say about that. Do you have anything, Nick?
Just really, really short. And what ends up happening is you lift up all of those that you're responsible for. Is that you you lift them up, you encourage them, and then they grow and flourish as a result of that. Right. So yeah, and I can say, just from that brief little bit, I'm sitting here thinking there's some even as I listen and say there's some conviction. There's some things like, I already know this, right? I already know this, but then as I'm hearing it again, it's like there's some areas that I could definitely take more ownership of things. There's some areas that I can actually apply some of these things much more than I have been or am now, and I think that's also another. Sometimes I think men can get kind of I've heard all this before, kind of thing. Right, yeah. And, but I think if you examine yourself, even if you would say you're doing a good job, you can always find ways to push harder, to push more, and to lean even more into that responsibility, because none of us are perfect, and we can find those things and ways of implementing responsibility and leadership better than we are now, and growing for the good of those around us. But yeah,
for sure. Well, Steve, it's been a pleasure, man. Loved having you on. Thanks for coming. Appreciate it.
Thanks, man. It's been a blast.
Any final thoughts?
No, I hope that I haven't. I feel like I've just talked this whole this whole time.
We love it when our guests
through-
come on to talk. It's not much of an episode if our guest comes on and doesn't really say anything.
Yeah,
It's been great.
I guess that's true.
We've talked a lot about a lot of different things, and we started with the movie, and that's the whole point of our podcast is, we want to start with movies, and if you can watch a movie well, it will soak into your life enough. If you do it enough, it's just an exercise is really all it is, and then you'll be able to watch life well. And if you can watch life well, you can live it well. And so that's kind of the trajectory that we're on. Again, we love what you're doing over at Regular Man. Always welcome back. Thanks again for watching, guys. And we'll see you on the next one. Hey guys, it's Parker from the WatchWell Podcast. If you like this video, we want to go ahead and have you subscribe right here on this button. If you want to watch the full podcast episode, go ahead and click right here. And if you want to watch another WatchWell clip, go ahead and click right here. And remember, if you're going to watch well. We'll see you in the next one.